Lokati here. Today we are going to be going over our Tanky Flickerstrike build. This was an extremely popular build of mine early on in the league that kind of combined the new improved shield affixes as well as the passive tree redesign alongside a tri-LE DPS sword with a crit setup that was really able to do very, very good damage, low and high budget, and avoid the typical like paper mache lifestyle of most Flicker Slayers. However, with the loss of Slayer, we're going to have to reimagine the build, and it's come down to like two leading ascendancies. Our choices are either going to be Paladin or Wildspeaker. Now, Paladin gives us some additional options. We have access to some higher level auras for free without having to use a gem slot. But I'm not a big fan of this because you can't enlighten these, for example. We do gain access to 40% increased effect from magic utility flasks, which are good. Bring the Battle is okay, but we don't have a way to reliably taunt as Flicker Strike. So what it's going to come down to probably is Light of Divinity, Elemental Valiance for increased elemental damage to nearby enemies, and a 25% chance to summon the relics, which are going to give us damage auras, as well as Anointed Champion for a little bit of extra recovery, and then Field Medicine for the flash recovery. For Wildspeaker, the big standout here is we gain access to a free Headhunter, and we gain access to a free Feral's Fur via Flash the Teeth and Fearful Symmetry. Now, this has one downside in the fact that you can't socket less duration and swift affliction into Flash of Teeth, so you still have to have Aspect of the Cat on your gloves, but you get no reservation on it, and you get the frenzy charges and some additional max frenzy and power charges. So those are good things. But we still have to run Aspect of the Cat on gloves because we need to be able to socket less duration and swift affliction, otherwise we can't generate enough frenzy charges to work. That leaves us with Scourge of the Wilds being the last Ascendancy node that we would take, which gives us dex damage stacking. And so the Wildspeaker ends up being a dex damage stacker with a freed up chest slot and a free Headhunter. Very, very nice little setup there. Now, as far as which one is going to be better, there's no way to know yet, but we'll get into the POBs that I've got together for both of them, and we'll start off with the Paladin. So, the Paladin is a Slayer base, so we're really using our original Slayer guide with a few small changes. On our early budget, we're still going to rely on a Rebuke of the Vol as a cheap entry-level option, doing good damage, just any elemental sword that you can get your hands on before then. Looking for a shield with some useful stats on it, a helmet with some useful stats on it. You can see we've got accuracy here and here, because we are going to be using precise technique early on until we can get better gear. Get body armor with some resistances and some stats on it. Grab Ceaseless Feast to help with our Frenzy Charge generation. Dark Ray Vectors to help with our max Frenzy. A Carnage Heart because it's good stats and resistances and very easy and cheap to get a hold of. We get an Amethyst Ring with ideally some useful stats on it. Go for an early Taming as early as we can because Taming is very, very good for the build. Barracks Respite is the hard to get ring, so keep an eye out for good values on Barracks Respites, and then you can buy the other two rings and make a Taming with the vendor recipe very easily. And then our belt here, we just again want some useful stats and resistances on it. Nothing complex in our gearing here for the early budget. Jewels are just gonna be like attack speed, life, whatever, just some useful crit. Obviously is not valuable at this point in time, so you're gonna lean more towards attack speed, increased attack speed, increased damage with swords, increased damage while holding a shield, attack speed while holding a shield, things like that. Just get some useful jewels. You might want to get a Corrupted Blood immunity on one of these as well, but early on that's not that big of a deal. For our Paladin Ascendancy, again we are running Light of Divinity, Elemental Valiance, Anointed Champion, and Field Medicine here. With this setup here, you're looking at somewhere roughly around 3 million DPS. On our skills, we're running Flicker Strike with Life Tap, Trinity, Multi-Strike, Fortify, and Elemental Damage with attacks. Once you are able to spec into Clever Thief, you can drop the Life Tap off of here and go for any other high damage support gem that you have access to. You'll just need to adjust your auras appropriately to make sure that you have enough mana to hit at least one time with Flicker Strike. For our auras here, we're running Determination and Anger. Anger could run anything else here. Anger is just like a filler damage because it scales really well early on. Later on, we will not be using Anger, however. We are running Precision with Arrogance here. We're running Poacher's Mark because we are not crit based yet with Blood Rage. And then as soon as you can find one, or as soon as you can make one, grab a Vol Smite and a Vol Haste, and then put more duration on there. You're primarily going to use these versus bosses. You can smite normally as you're running around the map once every 6 seconds, I believe. A 4-second duration, and then more duration makes it a 6-second. You smite once every 6 seconds for a lightning damage aura, and then you Vol Smite for big tanky rares or bosses for a much larger aura. The aura from Vol Smite lasts 12 seconds, which also means you can do damage for a much longer time before having to worry about refreshing it. And then, of course, Vol Haste just gets an attack speed done as well. And again, you'll primarily be using Vol Haste on bosses. And then Elemental Relics are coming from the Paladin Ascendancy. And so that gets us set up in our early budget on this character. The passive tree is pretty straightforward. You're going to come down here to take Bravery. Come down here and get your Sword Mastery because you do need Frenzy charges here. And you're going to make sure you get Mark Mastery for Frenzy charges here. It is really tough to play Flicker Strike before getting access to Sword Mastery and Mark Mastery. So this build is set up to realistically be about level 70. Be the earliest you step into the Paladin version of the build because you won't have access to any way to reliably generate Frenzy charges. Now, there is an exception to that. Sword at 52, you can run Cannon Sword, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head. Not Oro Sacrifice, although you could run an Oro Sacrifice, but that is high level. Terminus Est. You can run Terminus Est at 51, sorry. And you could start running Frenzy Strike then. You would just have to do more of a crit-based build, which would be more of a mid-budget build. So if you want to skip over to early budget and start Flicker Striking early, you can grab a Terminus Est, go crit, and crit multi-strike can get you generally enough charges with Sword Mastery and Mark Mastery to keep going. But Ceaseless Fist with your shield and your sword is what is recommended to get started on the build. For leveling, you can level this as anything in the world that you would like. I would say Lightning Strike or Splitting Steel or even Spectral Throw are great leveling builds that will utilize the same tree. I will include a link to my video on leveling a Slayer as well. You can see that video. Now, once we get over to our mid-budget, we are looking at better items all around. You're looking at an 849 DPS foil. We're looking for Tri-Ele foil with crit, multi, and attack speed. We're looking for a shield with more defensive attributes, and we'll be going straight for a Shaper shield with life recovery on block. These are fairly easy to craft because you'll just grab a shield and you'll just keep slamming it with Harvest Juice, rolling life on it until you get life on block, and then one other useful stat, maybe 2 if you're lucky, and then you'll craft on the second or the third useful stat. So you'd be spamming life, looking for life plus recover life, and either avoid ailment, suppress damage, or block, and then you'll craft on block if you don't have block, and if you do get block, you'll craft on either suppress or avoid ailments depending on the one that you need. For a helm, we're just running again a generic helm. It's got some accuracy, some life, and some resistances on it. We are switching over to a Feral's Fur in the mid-budget, keeping Dark Ray vectors and upgrading our gloves to include aspect of the cat, as well as some attack speed, spell suppression, and damage while leeching. These are a little bit more difficult to self-craft. If you want to craft it with essences, I would get a Fractured Suppress or a Fractured Life, and then hit it with attack speed essences until you get the third stat that you're missing. Then you can Beastcraft on aspect or null off a prefix if you need to, and then, or sorry, null off a suffix if you need to, and then Benchcraft on the prefix damage while leeching onto the gloves themselves. Yoke is going to be kind of the key point of the build here. Most of the damage of the build comes from the enemies take 10% increased damage for each type of ailment you have inflicted on them. Make sure that 10% increased damage is your max roll. The chance to shock is irrelevant. Increased damage is what is important. Outside of that, you want to get good resistance rolls on it and then catalyze it for resistance as well. Running an amethyst ring for life resistances, damage, stats, just general things that you need. Again, a taming ring for damage. You want the max increased elemental damage roll that you can get on it. And an Arn's Anguish to convert our endurance charges over to brutal charges, which allows us to deal triple damage. In the high budget, we'll replace Dark Vectors with Ralakesh so we can go back to taking advantage of our endurance charges. But the tank ability of the character right now at this point is still really strong with 20k max fist, 52 LE hit, and 250k effective health pull. So I think you'll be just fine running Arns without the Ralakesh now. Now here, you want to make sure you get a really good tincture. This is an example of one with melee weapon crit multiplier on it. You can also get one with attack speed on it. Those are good as well. And you can also get one with... don't have one here. Another really good tincture would be one that has elemental penetration. These are easy to craft. It's just a matter of alt spamming it to death. And so it takes a little bit of time, but you want increased effect or increased effect and burn rate. Either one of them works, and you want to get the best roll that you can on it. And then you're going to want to get penetrates elemental resistances as an option. And then you can Blessed Orb roll that to 100%. Make sure you quality it for the increased effect. And then that will give you a prismatic tincture that has penetration on it. And then the elemental penetration is probably going to be your highest DPS, depending on where your gear is at this point. Silver Flask, Granite Flask, Jade Flask, and Amethyst Flask to finish out our flasks here. We are not running a Life Flask, although you can run a Life Flask if you'd like to. We are suffering greatly on Chaos Res unless you get really lucky with gloves, helmet, or on your ring itself here. And so Amethyst Flask is shoring up our low Chaos Res. You can give up your Jade Flask, which would be the preferable one to give up if you want to add a Life Flask back into the build. But we're relying on Life Leech as well as Consecrated Aura and our Shield Recovery primarily to keep us alive. We are using an Ancestral Vision combined with Avoid Elements for ailment immunity and Interrogation to give us Scorch, Brittle, and Sap, and a Lethal Pride for Intimidate and Rage on Hit. Our Intuitive Leap Jewel over here also saves us a lot of skill points by allowing us to spec around this node and pick up valuable nodes in that area. If you don't have access to an Intuitive Leap, you can go to these nodes normally as you need. Obviously, you would lose aspect of the links and you would lose Survivalist, possibly lose Heartseeker, depending on what level you are. This tree is set up for 97. We just have 4 extra points in here because we have to take... we have to use a dual socket for our duelist Paladin prismatic jewel here. Then over to our high budget, which is the highest DPS that we have set up on this character, on the Paladin, which is currently set, we're running about 73 million DPS right now. This is with a weapon attack one. If we switch over to an elemental pin, looks like that doesn't really help us that much in particular, although I think this other one... You have to be careful with these tinctures. If you copied it from the game, you'll see that it adds quality and the increased effect into it. And then it adds it into it again. So you don't want to use these ones that are copied from the game. And so this one that we crafted is a more accurate representation of our DPS on the build. So that's going to put us at about 70 million DPS on this high budget. Now I'll be continuously updating and making changes to this build. And so the POB will be updated. So this number could go up, down, or sideways, depending on what we're doing. For example, we're missing some strength here that I need to go back in and figure out where we lost strength on the build. But all of these will be continuously updated as we're playing the game and getting things put together. So these will be your 3 starting options on the Paladin, early, mid, and high budget. And then, of course, we have for the Dex Stacker as well. Now, the Dex Stacker, we've got a level 75 layout. We've got a level 95 layout. This is mainly the gear is unchanged. And then we have a late game layout with much, much better crafted gear on the character, including like a Mage Blood. And so this one is going to be sitting around 9 million DPS, 15 million DPS, depending on where you are in the tree, up to 42 million DPS for the late game build on the character. It is not as tanky as the Paladin is, but still has very reasonable survivability with a 20k max fizz hit, 157k effective health pool. We're running a very similar setup by running Vol Haste, Vol Smite. We have Cat on our gloves, but we're running a rare chest instead of the Feral's Fur. We are running a Shaper foil that is not terribly difficult to craft. You're basically just going to get a foil, get it shapered. You can do that by hitting it with a Crusader Orb and then harvest crafting it until you hit a Shaper, or just getting a Shaper foil off the ground by running Shaper maps or buying a Shaper foil off someone else. But you're going to use a minion essence on it until you hit add 2 to 4 cold damage to attacks with this weapon per 10 dexterity. Then you can fill the prefix with whatever you want. You'll run like a crafted 3 mods on the suffix, fill the prefix, reroll speed with suffixes cannot be changed. Actually, to make this one, you'd really want the prefixes just straight filled. So you might need to exalt orb just to get something in that prefix. This one has an empty prefix because it's just the example we made. But you want prefixes filled with minions increased damage and 2 to 4 attacks with this weapon per 10 dexterity. Then with prefixes filled, you're going to go prefixes cannot be changed, reroll speed for attack speed. Then you're going to go prefixes cannot be changed with craft 3 mods, veiled orbit, try to get the increased crit or the crit multiplier veil, craft the other one on there, and you're done with the weapon. It's not a complicated craft, but it is a little bit of currency to get that craft going. We've got, again, a shield here that is a Shaper shield with useful stats on it, Fractal Thoughts for damage, body armor with spell suppression, and we're going to go for high evasion and armor on this rather than life and just run 15% life on the tree. Gauntlets are going to be the same. Darkrai Vector Boots. We're going to go for an amulet for stats, resistances, and life. We're going to go for a ring for stats, resistances, and life. Same there. Vice for stats, resistances, and life. The rings, you're going to use essences to slam dex on them until you get useful stats and craft the other one. Same thing for the Vice. You're going to slam it with dex essences until you get useful stats and craft something else on there. And then just a jewel with some stats and some life on it. Running a Diamond, Silver, and Granite Flask as well as an Net Series Promise. And then again, an Elemental Penetration Tincture here. We're using Intuitive Leap in the same fashion on the build. And then we're running a Crimson Jewel with some stats and maybe some crit on it, as well as some Corrupted Blood immunity. And then we are running again Flash of the Teeth, Scourge of the Wilds, Boon of the First Ones, and Fearful Symmetry. Again, this is 15.5 million DPS with a Headhunter on a Flickerstrike build, which should feel very, very comfy in mapping, but will fall a little bit behind in bossing compared to what the Paladin has to offer, because you're not always going to have a Headhunter buff that is useful once you get to a boss, or especially versus for bosses, things like that. Now, for the late game version of the build, we're doing basically the same thing as before, just better items in every slot, as well as a Mage Blood with good flasks to support our character. And again, a Lethal Pry with Rage and Intimidate on hit, so that we can take advantage of those nodes as well. Now, this one has the least amount of work put into it because it is a completely new build for me, as opposed to Paladin, which is a conversion from the original Flickerstrike build. So we'll continue to work on this as the weeks progress and we get into the league and make changes and improvements on it based on what we find and what other people may find, so that we can maximize the character. As far as our tree goes, it is a very similar tree. The only difference is we're starting from Ranger rather than starting from Duelist. So we lose out on these nodes right here, such as Bravery and Art of the Gladiator, but we get to pick up Heart of Oak and One with Nature. Outside of that, the tree is very similar to the mid-budget build on the original Flickerstrike character, with picking up the Attribute Mastery node here, as well as Utmost Swiftness, because that is very important to us. On our skills, Ball Flickerstrike again with Ice Bite, Multi-Strike, Cold Penetration, Close Combat, and Fortify. This is not a Trinity build, so this is pure cold damage. We're automating Steel Skin on the build. We're running Flesh and Stone Period of Elements for Ailment Immunity and Herald of Ice, Ball Smite, Ball Haste, and more duration. We are running an Arcanist brand with Punishment, as well as Frostbomb and Bone Chill, so that we can get a cold exposure on the target, as well as increased damage based on chill effect. And Punishment is a fantastic curse to carry because it increases our survivability and increases our damage. And we have the Whispers of Doom anointed on this character so that we can maintain that. Running Assassin's Mark with Mark on Hit and Life Tap. And then again, Restoration and Swift Deflection on our gloves here. And so these will be the two choices that we have for our Flickerstrike character. They're both relatively tanky. They're both really strong DPS. They're both mostly crafted gear with a few realistically achievable uniques in the league. So you should be able to get either one of these characters put together within the first few days of the league to get comfy in mapping and then start scaling it up. I will probably personally be league starting as a Righteous Fire, but I have a few viewers that will be playing both of these builds. And so we'll kind of keep everything going, and I'll run one of these as a second character as well, so we can theory crafting it, improving it, and making changes to the characters. And then as POB gets updated, we'll be able to pull out maybe those prismatic jewels and get this a little bit more accurate to what you're going to be at each level, because all these trees have extra points stuck in them just for the prismatic jewel that we need to simulate the Ascendancy. If you have any questions over anything, leave a comment down below or come by Twitch channel. I'm happy to answer them. Helping people get these builds figured out is one of my favorite things to do, so please come by and ask questions. Thank you very much for watching. Y'all have a wonderful day. Peace.